this is our project on the French language. I'm Carla.
I'm Sam.
Okay, so
we're going to start off with some background information on the French language here. As you can see, it is split into three distinct eras, those being Old French, Middle French, and Modern French. The French language, it's a Romance language, which means it originates from Latin, specifically Vulgar Latin, which is what would be spoken by the lower class, the peasants, as opposed to, the royalty, the Pope, people like that. The language began around 800 AD to 1300 AD would be the Old French period. And this emerged out of Germanic influence on the current Latin language that was in place. France, at the time, was known as Gaul, was a region under Roman control. And as time went on, Germanic tribes, most notably the Franks, hence the name France, began to invade. And the interactions between the two peoples ended up merging their two languages into one, which became Old French as time went on. Soon later, 1300 to 1600 is the period we know as Middle French. And this emerged out of the Frankian dialect, which is a dialect of French spoken mostly in Paris. The reason this dialect in particular expands as opposed to other ones is due to it being popular in the central part of France, in Paris. Paris at the time, as it still is today, is a cultural, social, and political hub of France. Trade, law, all types of things go on in this area, so it became very important for both peasants, higher class, and all else to understand this language and speak it along with whatever other local dialects they spoke. And then finally, from 1600 onward, is the period known as Modern French. And this came out of France's interactions with other cultures outside of their local horizons. At this time, France itself began to have a bit more of an imperialistic attitude, and it spread to regions in Africa, regions in Asia, and its interactions with these other peoples sort of finalized the language into what we know today. And so we're going to move on to our next portion.
okay. Next, we have some French fun facts. So 45% of English words are from French origin. 220 million French speakers worldwide in 29 countries have French as the official language or one of the official languages. These 29 countries are spread out between 4 of the 6 continents, and it is the 6th most spoken language in the world. Also, French was not popular in France until after the Revolution.
All right. So next up, we're going to do a little analysis and comparison between English and French, having to do with the different portions of the language. So we're going to start with pragmatics here. The first thing that comes to mind, most perhaps significant portion of the language, would be the fact that articles, nouns, and all other things in the language are gendered, whereas they aren't in English. This is a common feature in many Romance languages, but not many Germanic languages, which English is one of. For example, in English, a car, we would just call it the car. No matter what it is, it's always the car. Whereas in French, it would be called la voiture, which is the feminine form of the word. Next, we're going to talk about how pronouns in French change depending on class, age, and authority. This is, solely a French concept, and this occurs when one speaks to someone who is an elder, someone who is a person of power, someone who should be respected, when we use a formal version of the word you, as opposed to an informal version. This formal version is the same as the plural version. It's vous. For example, instead of asking someone if it's your first time meeting them, if they are to be respected, instead of asking them, comment t'appelles-tu, which is like the informal version of asking what is your name, you would say, comment t'appelez-vous, which is just the formal version. It's a bit more respectful. And then once you become more familiar with this person, you begin to use the more familial to form of the word. And then lastly, in pragmatics, we have that in some cases, changing the gender of a noun will change the word's meaning. For example, here we have some words. We have le mode, which is setting, mode, option, that type of thing. Whereas if you change it to la mode, it becomes fashion. The same case is with the word for book. Un livre is a book, whereas une livre is a pound, like a measurement of weight. And that is that for pragmatics.
Some more analysis and comparison. We have in phonology, there are 37 sounds in the French phonetic alphabet, while there are 44 in English. So there are some English sounds that French speakers would not know of. One difference is the French R. So the French R is uvular, meaning the back of the tongue goes up when pronouncing it, but the English R, the top of the tongue goes up to the roof of the mouth. So in French, it's like a R, but in English, it's just an R. Next is the use of accents. When conjugating verbs, accents can appear to determine different tenses, or just certain words will have accents in them. Like the word for education is éducation, and the first E has an accent aigu, the first one in the table. It just determines how the letter is pronounced. Then there's la liaison. So when words end in a consonant and are followed by a word that starts with a vowel, usually you kind of merge the two sounds together. So an example I have is mes amis. You would say mes amis and just like flow the words into each other, or chez elle, because you can't have such like a break in between the words in French. Next, there's the prominence of silent letters. This is a major one in French. Most of the time when you see a word in French, half of the letters are not even pronounced. So for example, the letter H is never pronounced in French. And then ENT is usually pronounced as E, and ENT is usually the third person plural conjugation. And then also when you have a T, an S, an X, a Z at the end of the word, it's almost always dropped in pronunciation. So some examples for the H, there's hospital, which is hôpital, so just get rid of that H sound, because the H in English is glottal, which means you pronounce it, but in French it is not. Third person plural conjugation of to eat is il mange. It's just the NT is nowhere to be found. And then courageux, it's courageous. Courageux, there's no X pronunciation. And chez, it's just chez, there's no Z. And then for syntax, phonetic stress occurs at the end of French words. So if I were to say computer, it's computer, it goes down at the end, but then ordinateur, the end syllable will go up. Or in sentences, they tend to move up, like je suis allé au supermarché. Your pitch and tone gets higher, while in English it's I went to the supermarket. It tends to go down. Next, to have expresses feeling in French, and to be in English. So if I were to say I am cold in English, I would say j'ai froid in French, which means I have cold. There is adjective and gender agreement. So adjectives add an E at the end when it is feminine or describing something feminine. So if I were to say he is smart, I would say il est intelligent. But when she is smart, elle est intelligente with an E at the end. And this goes for all other adjectives as well. And then finally, there's different capitalization rules between French and English. So for example, these are the weak, I when referring to yourself, languages, nationalities, only when used as adjectives. None of these are capitalized in French, whereas in English they would be.
All right, beautiful. And next we're going to talk about some comparisons between French and English, different components that they have, or similar components as well. The first being, of course, as we mentioned earlier, gendered nouns. French utilizes a gendered noun system, whereas English and many other Germanic languages do not. The next would be the fact that in French, you put the adjective after the noun as opposed to before, which you would in English. For example, the phrase next week, as we say in English, the adjective comes before the noun. It describes the word following it. Whereas in French, you'd say la semaine prochaine, which means the same thing, except the adjective describes the word coming before it. It comes after the word. There are some special cases in which the adjective will come first, but in most cases, the adjective will come after the noun at hand. Next, we're going to talk about the double negative in French. It utilizes a form in order to negate a sentence. There are two words required as opposed to simply one. In English, you'd say something such as, "It is not my house." To negate the sentence, all you are doing is adding the word not. It is my house versus it is not my house. Whereas in French, you need to add two words, those being ne and pas. For example, if you're saying it is my house, in French you say c'est ma maison, but to say it is not my house, you'd have to say ce n'est pas mon maison. It's just those little differences there. Next, we have that the article form changes in the plural as well as the noun form. In English, it's only the noun that changes. For example, the book does not become those books. In English, it's just simply the books. Whereas in French, the word for the book, le livre, becomes les livres. It means the same sort of thing, but you do have to change the article as well in French as opposed to only the noun. Lastly, we have as well that the two languages, French and English, share several cognates due to their close proximity to each other. They had many interactions and still do. So the language share many words. Some examples of these are, in English, you'd say brilliant. In French, it's brilliant. In English, it's perfect. French, it's parfait. English, it's restaurant. In French, it's restaurant. In English, it's education, whereas in French, it's éducation.
Next, we have difficulties that French speakers may have when speaking in English. First, there are many false cognates between French and English. So even though there's a ton that would help them out, there are some ones like assister means to attend, although it looks like the word to assist. And also blesser means to wound rather than to be blessed. Also phonetic differences between English and French, such as sounds in the English language that are not native to French language, such as TH, H, and W. So in TH, there are no dental sounds at all in French. So there's no sounds where the tip of the tongue is hitting the front of the teeth. So even word like teeth is going to be difficult for a native French speaker because they're not used to that TH sound. Next is H. As mentioned before, there's no glottal pronunciation of the H. It is silent, therefore hôpital is hospital. And the W is an uncommon letter in general when it comes to French words. So W pronunciations are extremely uncommon. So therefore words like jewelry with a W sound or words that produce the W sound, such as squirrel, are extremely hard for native French speakers to understand.
Next, we're going to go over some French language cultural norms, the first of these being some rules that are taking place in communication. In first encounters, you have to utilize the formal version of the word you. This would be encounters with someone you respect, someone of authority, a grandparent, so an elder, anyone who deserves that extra level of respect. You would use the formal version of you, and it would be considered rude to use the wrong version, to use an informal version, in a situation that you should use the formal version. Secondly, communication is very direct in French. Sentences are very constructed in a very particular sort of way. Many sentences that are simple in English end up being long, drawn out, complex sentences in French when translated. So this leads to a lack of subtlety and that sort of thing, and it can be perceived as rude to foreign speakers. But in actuality, this is just how the language works. It's in no way meant to be rude. Secondly, are some nonverbal communication. Physical contact is extremely common in French conversation. It's a sign of affection and respect. Anything like an arm touch, a handshake, any sort of thing, whatever it may be, is common in French speaking. And finally, we have some underlying norms as well. Eye contact, as well as it is in English, is respected in French. It's not a sign of aggression or anything else that is usually the case of some countries. And further, we have la bise, which is a traditional form of greeting in French culture. And this is when one would kiss both sides of the face of someone they respect, someone of authority, someone an elder, you know, someone who you have a bit of familiarity with. You wouldn't do this to a stranger. It's just like a traditional form of greeting that is pretty commonplace over there.
Finally, we have some classroom implications and tips. So as with teaching English to any ELL, the use of mnemonic devices, songs, and other memorization techniques can be extremely beneficial in grabbing their attention and helping create a connection between their home language and English, and also stressing the similarities can help, like when talking about cognates, finding what makes their language connect to English can help them with their motivation. Utilizing props, physicality, demonstrations, getting their bodies moving can help them let loose and not think as hard and be more motivated to learn. The same with vocab similarities. This can help build confidence. Approaching harder pronunciations first, such as the TH, the H, and the R, can also help build confidence, because if they are learning words that have these pronunciations in them and it's difficult for them to pronounce, then they might become a little frustrated with it and not want to learn those words as much. But if you attack those pronunciations earlier and to help them master it, it can really help them with acquiring their language. So yeah, that is the end.